What's up, everybody? We've got 10 minutes, or should I say I've got 10 minutes to talk to you all about MOA versus MRAD. The reason I say that in my intro here is that my long-standing cohort, Mark, is out on vacation currently. And being that at the time of this recording, it is the 4th of July week, a lot of other folks are pretty busy here. So you got just me, Jimmy, here to explain to you the differences. And the reason we want to talk about this is MOA versus MRAD is one of those things where, as if choosing a rifle scope wasn't already complicated enough for you folks out there. You have magnification ranges, you have objective sizes, illumination, first focal plane, second focal plane. Once you finally feel like you've gotten it all figured out, you know exactly the scope configuration that you want. You look at that configuration, or somebody's talking to you about it, and then they say, well, do you want it an MOA versus MRAD? And I've seen a lot of people go into a deer in the headlights kind of mode there, because now they finally sifted out all the different magnification ranges and all that stuff, and they're actually literally looking at the same optic. Everything is the same, but there's just two different units of measure in there. It's much like in many ways when you look at stuff standard versus metric and measurements for linear units of measurement. Why did the world need to make two? I wish I had a good answer for you, but unfortunately, I do not. My first recommendation to somebody who kind of gets that look in their eye and they start asking, well, what's the difference? Which one should I shoot? My first recommendation is to think about what you've shot before. If you have used an optic before and you don't know what it measured in, and you're in the US of A here, I would go out on a limb to say that you've probably been using MOA. It's been the standard around the US for quite some time. And if you've heard people talking about quarter MOA or fractions like quarters, halves, if you've heard people around you talking about inches, you need to dial, 1 inch or something like that, then chances are you have been using MOA. It's the classic. It's the one that people have been trying to equate to linear units of measure, like 1 MOA equals 1 inch at 100 yards for quite some time. And when people say that, they're not far off. 1 MOA is close to an inch at 100 yards, but it is not exact. You can use that correlation in relatively close ranges and be pretty darn close, but as soon as you start trying to stretch it out at all or being really precisely accurate at any point, that's where the whole angular to linear unit of measurement that you're doing there is going to start to break down. And kind of talking about that angular unit of measurement, that is what MOA and MRAD really actually is. It is an angular unit of measure, not a linear. And the reason that's the case is that we're dealing with ballistics. We're dealing with rifles, which are essentially sort of like handheld cannons, if you will. If you've ever seen anybody shooting larger artillery, what do they do in order to get that artillery to shoot further? They angle it upwards, or they angle it from side to side in order to get the projectile where they want it to in a rather precise fashion. And that's what we're doing on a much smaller scale with our rifles that are shooting tiny little rocks that are bound to hit steel or paper at really far away distances. We need to change the angles at which we're pointing our barrel and our muzzle in order to put the bullet where we want it to go downrange. It's pretty amazing when you actually think about what's all going on in there. And the rifle scope's job, whether it's you dialing your turrets or whether it's you holding over on various different features of the reticle, whether that's dots or hash marks or anything else, the reticle's job inside of a rifle scope is just to manipulate where you are pointing the barrel in order to get the projectile to go where you want it to go. And again, it's really important that we keep everything in this angular unit of measure and we don't try and stray into linear units of measure. The best kind of example or parallel that I can draw up would be to say, let's say you're building a house and the contractor comes out to you and he says, how tall do you want the front door? I'm not a contractor, so if this is a stupid question, folks out there who are, then feel free to call me out on it. But let's say they come out and they say, how tall do you want the front door? And anybody would normally probably say, I want it 7 feet tall, something like that. Well, let's say now the contractor comes out and he says, how tall do you want the front door? And so you say, well, here you go. Let's go out to the road, which is about 100 yards away. We're going to stand here and we're going to get out our protractor. We're going to set it level to the ground. And then from the level on the ground, we're going to go up. And I'd like my door at 100 yards away to be at about a 32-degree angle from where we're standing. That's where I like the top of the front door. the contractor's going to look at you like you're from Mars and just say, why can't you just give it to me in inches or feet? That is very similar when we go into shooting. People make it way too complicated on themselves when they start saying, okay, so I'm shooting at 100 yards, or I'm shooting at, let's say, 300 yards to get away from that whole 1 inch equals 1 MOA at 100 yards. Say I'm shooting at 300 or 400 yards, and I see that my impacts are down about 3.5 inches from where I was aiming, and they're right about 2.25 inches maybe. And of course, we're all guessing from really far away from where I'm aiming. So if I do all the math to convert the inches and these fractions back into MOA or into MRAD somehow with, there are calculations out there to do it because you're kind of making a triangle. You can use triangulation to do this. You're just making it way too complicated on yourself. If you try to fight using MOA and MRAD, you're going to make it worse. Just use it. And we have reticles inside of our rifle scopes that are a huge help in these cases. You can go to your reticle, even if it's a standard duplex. I'm talking like the most simple crosshair of all time. The thickness of the line will have some value in terms of MOA or MRAD. The hash marks, if it's a really more complex technical reticle in first focal plane, the dots will all be spaced apart in certain different increments of angular units of measure. And those you can just use your reticle like a ruler. And now let's say I see the hole that I'm making in paper or the impact I'm making on steel. I can see where that is in relation to where I was aiming. I can put my reticle on there like a grid and then just use the measurements to figure out how far I'm off, and then use my turrets, which nowadays most modern scopes are starting to get to the point where the turrets adjust the reticle in the same increments that the reticle is showing you. So you have an MOA reticle, MOA turrets, MRAD reticle, MRAD turrets. Now you can just use those turrets to then dial whatever the reticle is showing you. Or you can use the reticle to hold off whatever the reticle is showing you. And that's as easy as it gets. You can go through all the 1 mil is 1 mil radian, which is this many hundredths or whatever, or 360 somethings of a circle. And so that's like pi, and you're throwing in square roots, and I don't even know. It's like logarithmic functions, something like that. That's all unnecessary. Just use MOA and MRAD. It's as simple as it gets. Whether you're shooting at 100 yards, if you see on your reticle that you are off 1 MOA, or whether you're shooting at 1,000 yards and you see on your reticle that you are off 1 MOA. 1 MOA, 1 MRAD is equal to 1 MRAD at any distance. Just put your reticle over the target. And of course, if you're using first focal plane, you can do that on any magnification. If you're using second focal plane, you do have to be mindful of what magnification you're on. There is a set calibrated magnification, usually the highest magnification. Sometimes it's different. So look at your manual, but it's that simple. So with about 2 minutes left here, it comes down to, what should you choose? Maybe you're still asking that question. Is one better than the other? No, one is not better than the other. Technically, MOA, a quarter MOA, is a little bit more fine of an adjustment than 0.1 MRAD, which MRAD scopes usually adjust in. But that doesn't make a gigantic difference in the grand scheme of things. MOA, you're measuring in fractions. You have quarter MOA, eighth MOA, half MOA. For some folks who are dialing a ton and doing a lot of addition and things like that, that gets complicated because you start having to have common denominators. If you're at 1 3/4 MOA on your turret, and then you got to go up another 3/4, well, then they go up to 2.5, and that for some people just gets too complex. MRAD is a 0.1 based system, so you can just, if you're at 0.5 mils is another word for MRAD. Then somebody tells you to dial 0.3, well, just dial then to 0.8. It's just 0.5 plus 0.3 equals 0.8. So that can be a little bit more simple. I would say most hunting scopes out there are going to be in MOA. It's still kind of the standard here around the U.S. And most of the precision guys are kind of leaning towards MRAD nowadays, I think just for the fact that the 0.1 system is easier for them to use. Looking at low power variables and stuff and red dots, a lot of those are going to be in MOA as well, mostly because the distances are shorter. So you do kind of start to get into that 1 MOA equals about an inch. A red dot and a low power variable too is usually, minute of man, so to speak. So you're not looking for hyper accuracy. So just trying to be quick and close enough. But really it comes down to, again, also consider what your buddies at the range are using too. If you're with a ton of folks who are all shooting mills, I would suggest also shooting mills. Otherwise, you're all going to be talking in a different language, and it's going to get real complicated. So, boom, we just hit 0. Hopefully, I made the MOA versus MRAD debate a little bit easier for some folks out there. If you have any other questions or you'd like to get really complicated with us, definitely let us know. Otherwise, what do you prefer, MOA or MRAD? We're curious. Thanks, everybody. Bye.